So this is our second full day of Rohatsu Sesshin 2021. And what a challenging 20 or 21 months this has been for so many. And on the second full day, it's often a bit challenging as well to even give a talk. Most of us are adjusting to the schedule, and maybe some of us are not quite here yet, or that's no problem. But you might have trouble with your back or heavy eyelids. Again, no problem. All this will change. And this talk today, which focuses on the Sansui-kyo by our beloved Dogen, is about stillness in motion. I'm going into this very beautiful concept that Dogen evoked in this sutra. And we can ask ourselves, how do we sit in stillness and also in the phenomenal world throughout our lived experience? How do we do that? Enkyo Roshi opened this theme for us yesterday, and I'm so grateful. It truly is one of the keys to our practice. And as I gaze at this line of mountain meditators in Upaya Zendo, it's a beautiful sight to behold. And I know at the same time that there's stillness, there's a whole lot going on inside and around those mountains. Now, as we know, Rohatsu Sesshin marks the awakening of the Buddha. And many people are sitting all over the world to mark this occasion. And it's beautiful. And it's tough. And always for me, there are moments of heartbreak in the darkness as I settle into my seat and see how completely puny my endeavors have been to realize the way. And recently, my student and good friend, Rhonda McGee, reminded me of words of Alice Walker, quotes, "The way forward is with a broken heart." And maybe this is true for some of us. It is for me. And it certainly is a time of reckoning in terms of our world. And Rohatsu Sesshin is a time of reckoning in terms of our own lives and how we are in the world and with our earth. My sense is that our first experience of existential suffering is of you and I not realizing the reality and impacts of cause and effect. This is because that is. Just not seeing it, not getting it, and finding ourselves caught in the knot of our habits, in the grip of ignorance that leads us into this dank well of suffering. And for many, the first heartbreaking awakening is realizing that there are outcomes in relation to our actions. And when we see this, we might face our situation, the catastrophe of our lives, the betrayal of our best, with a sense of heartbreak and also of waking up. Truly, what we do, how we are with each other and our earth really counts. And for many of us, our second experience of awakening is that powerful moment when we choose to entrust ourselves to the wholeness of our moment-to-moment experience, to our sense fields, to each other, to whatever is arising, even to our Rohatsu schedule, so we can dwell deeply in our life, in our full and inclusive life, moment after moment. And please understand that this time of practice is exactly that. It's a process of entrustment. And we can ask, well, how does entrustment happen? And I believe that entrustment happens through the medium of our attention. So I want to invite us to give our attention to exactly where we are, here and now, through our stillness, and also through our experience of the arising and a falling away, moment after moment, of this, of this, of this. No two moments alike. So as we know, this year's Rohatsu offers us the opportunity to explore Dogen's Mountains and Rivers Sutra. And this was Kaz's idea. In fact, for years, he's always been the one who set the theme for Rohatsu. And I'm so grateful for his beautiful translations, multiple translations, mind you, of the text. And as Enkyo encouraged you and others, and I the same, please read it. But maybe you're also a bit mystified. Now, the Sansui Kyo, Mountains and Water Sutra, was written at Koshoji. This is a small jewel of a monastery south of Kyoto. And I'm so fortunate that Kaz and I visited there a number of times over the years. Shinzan was with us one of those times. It's an intimate monastery and it's very humble. And Dogen lived there from 1233 to 1243. And the sutra was composed in 1240, probably during the chill of autumn when the maple leaves were blood red. And in Chinese paintings, you often see a curved roof of a Buddhist monastery nestled halfway up a mist-covered mountain. Now, this wasn't Koshoji, by the way, but it was, that image is more like what we know from Tianchong Monastery, which is tucked into the mountains outside of Ningbo, China. And Tianchong was the monastery where earlier Dogen met Rujing, his great teacher, and where Dogen awakened. Again, so fortunate, Kaz and I visited Tianchong at various times over the past decades. And being there, one could really feel the source of Dogen's inspiration in the mountains that held the monastery, and that the mountains and the monastery were an undivided reality. Now, both at Tianchong in China and Eiheiji, the monastery that Dogen founded in Echizen Province in western Japan, one could sense, being in these remarkable places where Dogen practiced, that for Dogen, mountains, valleys, rivers, clouds, the great sky, and the monastery itself, none of them were divided. But they were also not just the subject of the sutra, or just the subject of a painting. From Dogen's perspective, they seem to be the sutra itself, a way that Dogen conveyed perception of the embodied words or teachings of the Buddha. And from Dogen's point of view, they were the Buddha himself. They are the Buddha herself. So again and again in this beautiful sutra, Dogen portrays mountains and rivers as teaching us and as actually the realization or expression of the ancient Buddhas. And even more, mountains and rivers put Buddhism into practice directly. They live the life of a Buddha. Again, looking at Upaya Zendo, at this mountain range on our videos, as we practice, this is the realization, if you will, of the life of a Buddha or the life of awakening. So here we are, this intimate group at Upaya in our Circle of the Way Temple. And then more of us online, some of you in your bedroom, some of you in your office or in your living room. None of us in the fastness of a Buddhist monastery clinging to a foggy, wind-blown mountainside. And since I'm here with Enkyo, I'm reminded of a moment in Kham in eastern Tibet that she shared with our group in the Nomads Clinic. And we were in a very high altitude area. And I was, as usual, dealing with a lot of details. And so I didn't join the small group that hiked up to this sacred lake at even a higher altitude. And this is what she reflected to us when she returned from that lake, a sacred lake. She saw the high mountains reflecting into the lake. And she realized that from the point of view of her experience, she saw so clearly that skyscrapers too are the actualization and the practice of the Buddha. Well, that might be a bit hard for us to understand, for us to grasp, but I want us to look at this a little more deeply. Yes, we in the ancients probably favor the natural world. But I'm remembering her experience in Kham of realizing that Buddha and the actualization of Buddha is exactly where you are, exactly where I am in this very moment. Your living room, your bedroom, maybe gazing out your window at a meadow or the sky, or staring into the face of a high-rise. So maybe for our generation, instead of mountains and rivers, our sutra might be high-rises and highways. But let's return to Dogen's words that were shared yesterday by Roshi Enkyo and me on the opening night, and really let them sink in, because one of the reasons why the natural world is portrayed so often in the ancient scrolls coming from China and Japan is that it refers to an unconstructed quality of presence. And our natural mind is what we're cultivating within this context. And the challenge, of course, at this time is how do we cultivate that natural heart-mind in the midst of all the conditions that we're facing at this moment? So Dogen, this is the third time you've heard this. Mountains and waters right now are the actualization of the ancient Buddha way, each abiding in its phenomenal expression, realizes completeness. Because mountains and waters have been active since before the empty eon, they are alive at this moment. Because they have been the self before form arose, they are emancipation realization. Because mountains are high and broad, the way of riding the clouds is always reached in the mountains. The inconceivable power of soaring in the wind comes freely from the mountains. So just sit with those words of Dogen for a breath. You know, some years ago, we were so fortunate that Dr. Carl Bielefeld, who's Associate Professor of Religious Studies at Stanford, came to Upaya and with Kaz and me, and I think you were there, Enkyo, did a very powerful program on Dogen. And Dr. Bielefeld has written that Dogen is particularly interested in the contrast between permanent and changing, very much what Enkyo Roshi was exploring yesterday. And he asked, what is ancient and always so? Well, what is ancient and always so, in part, of course, refers to the teachings of the Buddha. And these teachings, the very fundamental teachings of the Buddha, haven't changed over time. And what is ever presently going on, asks Bielefeld, the practice of the Buddha, which actually changes according to circumstances. And I think this is a very important point. And Bielefeld goes on, since according to the Buddha's teachings, what is always so is that things are ever changing. And it's a contrast that is built right into the Buddhist landscape. So from my limited experience at Eiheiji and Tianchong, I have this real feeling of what Dr. Bielefeld is suggesting regarding mountains and waters. You know, it's that experience of the embeddedness of us in the context of our lived experience, that we're entangled in the world of our sensory experience as the wider world enters us and shapes us. And we also shape the external world, obviously. And I think that what Dogen is pointing to is something I've gotten very involved in trying to explicate more recently, which is what is called the inactive view. That is this, from Dogen's perspective, the direct experience of being mountains and rivers as an undivided reality of the lived experience of flowing and stillness in this very moment, mind, heart, body world. I think this is so essential. It's not just mind, heart, body. It's mind, heart, body, world. And when we say world, we mean not only the experience of our immediate geography, we're also including the ethics, the values, and the culture of our lived experience. So it's not just in the grip of our small knot of psychology, personal psychology. The practice is truly about opening us to this wider, radically inclusive context of experience. And this is what my old friend Francisco Varela called the inactive view. So I invite us now just for a moment, kind of including me, but not just on me, so to speak. Sense into where you are in this very moment. Allow yourself to expand your subjectivity to include all that you can into your experience, rejecting nothing. You know, here we have a helicopter flying overhead from the public works of New Mexico, I just learned. It's interesting. What else are you hearing? What are you seeing? Smelling, tasting, touching. This zendo that some 25 of us are in, or my little upstairs living room that I'm in, and where you are, and how that shapes your experience. Pause, really pause. Expand. Include. Accept. Let go. This chair, this cushion, this room, this space, this building, this valley, this city. Can you do that? Just allow yourself to practice this radical inclusivity, not focusing on just one thing, but really allowing your subjectivity to include what is your lived experience at this very moment. Stillness and flow. So recently at the refuge, with the advance of winter, the silence and stillness of the days and nights were not separate from the change of seasons, the changing of light and darkness, the night sky overhead with the moon on the night of the eclipse disappearing into the rust red of itself, and then the lunar body slowly appearing again as the hours moved into the silence of dawn. And I sat on that frosty deck up at 9,400 feet, wrapped in a comforter, in that kind of stillness that is open to the flow of change. Now, in East Asia, Buddhism, as we say, is so often identified with the natural world, not only in terms of stillness and flow, but also understand that natural landscapes were done in extraordinary detail. And for us, being fully present to the particulars of this very moment, which is what we're called to do in our practice, can be seen reflected in this ancient Chinese tradition of evoking a natural landscape precisely. And I recall years ago, Ka said that in our tradition, in our lineage, The emphasis is on precision and gentleness. And I think that these sensibilities of precision and gentleness are expressed in what we call intimacy. Intimacy meaning being one with all things. It could be your drying cloth in that moment of putting it on top of your oryoki bowls. It could be your toothbrush or your glasses. And I remember how often my teacher, Roshi Burney, referred to this in terms of one body practice. Not seeing yourself as separate from the dish that you're placing onto the drying rack, for example. One body practice. And this is the essence of our practice realization, this one body practice, this experience of inclusivity, where the feeling is not of self-conscious respect, but of a very deep kind of respect, where there's no self or other. Where in our community of practitioners, for example, or online, there is this sense of deep civility and care. It's really important at this time. We have to awaken this sensibility within our society once again. You know, this sense of intimacy is also expressed in the Buddhist layman Sudongpo, who 200 years before Dogen and 1,000 years before our time, he reflected this sensibility in a verse that is very famous. Now, he lived during the Song dynasty, and he was a poet and a painter and a calligrapher and a statesman and a pharmacologist. And we're pretty sure that this short verse influenced Dogen Sansui Kyo. And the poem is, "The sound of the stream is his long, broad tongue. The mountain, his body. This evening's 84,000 verses. How will I tell them tomorrow? How will I tell them tomorrow?" So let's again stop for a moment. What are the verses that are being offered to you right now, in this very moment? Not the words of Sudongpo, but listen, feel, what is the sutra right now? For me, it's the distant sound of the helicopter. Children's voices in the distance. The very low-level whir of electricity in the space that I'm currently occupying. You know, I recall a student of mine who was a violinist, and in an interview, I asked her about her practice, and she said, you know, in Zazen, I listen to and am always rehearsing in my mind Beethoven's violin concerto. And I said, well, now, I love that concerto too. And of course, I didn't want to discourage her from being with Beethoven. But I suggested to her that she let go of Beethoven for a little while and listen to the concerto of the present moment. The magpie in the early morning. The creak of wood in the zendo as the day warmed. The soft sound of feet moving across the zendo floor. And the quiet swish of the robe worn by the priest sitting next to her as she bowed. And her breath. And also the sound of silence. In Japanese culture, the emphasis is so deep on the experience of impermanence. The flow of all phenomena through space and through time. And at the same time, this deep stillness pervading the ground of everything. Maybe this is the most beautiful and poignant concerto of all, or not, because we have a construction project next door, it's the beep beep of the cement truck as it backs up and distracts us, or the sound of hammering, or the buzz of voices in the distance, or the honk of a car speeding down the road. And do we resist that? These so-called intrusions into our sensory reality. So let's stop again. And take a moment. What is unchanging? What is permanent? What is ancient and always so? And what is flowing? What is constantly unfolding in the present moment, in this tide of change? And yes, according to the Buddha's teaching, what is always so is that things are ever changing. And we can look at our mind, our heart, our body, our world. So our old friend, poet Gary Snyder composed his Mountains and Rivers Without End, a kind of epic reflection of the Sansui Kyo, but really through Gary's eyes. He composed it over a 40-year period. And he took his time. And so he was able to reflect this sensibility in what Dr. Bielefeld calls a haunting refrain that runs through mountains and rivers. And I just want to drop this refrain into your heart. And don't let it confound you, confuse you. But this is so Gary and also so Dogen. Walking on walking, underfoot earth turns. Walking on walking, underfoot earth turns. And Dogen writes this: when you see mountains from the ordinary world, and when you meet mountains while in mountains, the mountain's head and eye are viewed quite differently. Your idea or view of mountains not flowing is not the same as the view of dragons and fish. Human and heavenly beings have attained a position according to their own worlds, which other beings either doubt or do not doubt. You should not just remain bewildered and skeptical when you hear the words mountains flow, but together with Buddha ancestors, you should study these words. When you take one view, you see mountains flowing, and when you take another view, mountains are not flowing. One time mountains are flowing, another time they are not flowing. Gary, walking on walking, underfoot, earth turns. So I'd like to finish this talk a kind of musing on view why perspective taking is so important, why expanding our subjectivity into the experience of intersubjectivity, knowing that the room where you are is shaping your experience. The inactive view. If you're a dragon, you see mountains and waters in a certain way. If you're a fish, another. If you're you, another, or me, another. How do we develop this quality of practice realization that allows us to see things free of a narrow view, a narrow perspective? So it's pause, open, let go. And finishing with one of Dogen's poems. Evening zazen hours advance. Sleep hasn't come yet. More and more I realize mountains and rivers are good for the efforts of the way. Sounds of the river valley enters my ears. The light of the moon fills my eyes. Outside of this, not a single thing. Outside of this, not a single thing. So as we open ourselves to the days ahead of deep practice, there will be moments of exhausting resistance. There will be moments of great ease and inclusivity. And see if you can rest with that teaching of what is ever so, the truth of impermanence, the flow of phenomena, and also come to that still point. Just as the sky has this fundamental inclusiveness and clouds float freely here and there, see if you can come to that quality of deep rest and radical inclusivity. So I thank you for listening to my words this morning, reflecting, of course, what Enkyo Roshi shared, and Gary Snyder, and Carl Bielefeld, and Kaz, and Dogen, and you. And mostly, I am so grateful that we are together at this time. We can be considered, no matter how complicated our struggle might be at any point during the sesshin, and as I said at the beginning, moments of real heartbreak, that we have the blessing to not have bombs falling on us or living in a refugee camp or homeless on the cold streets of an American city, and to use this time deeply, sincerely. Do not squander, please, these minutes, hours, and days of being together as a community and in the body of deep practice. Thank you.